I will not.
Bom dia para quem é de bom dia, boa noite para quem é da boa noite, 93 para quem é de 93, paz profunda para quem é de paz profunda. Você leu certo, você leu Frater Orpheus, a gente realmente está entrevistando a pessoa mais importante de Thelema no mundo hoje. Você leu certo. But a entrevista tem que ser em inglês, então você tem que colocar select subtitles and translate to Portuguese. And then you understand what we are saying. Welcome, Frater. I will just introduce the people from the Boteco, and then I will talk to you because today it's a great honor for us. I received the notes that Breno Zácaro is translating your book. We are publishing it in Portuguese, and now it's an opportunity to talk to you. And I read some of your interviews. We are delighted to have you on show today. So we have several people here from all branches. So from witchcraft, we have André Correia.
Nice to meet you.
Hello. I'm just a student here, but I'm very I really want to know about. I really want to learn about Thelema. So I'm all ear. Thank you for being here with us.
And from the Enochian guys, Johan Flamingo.
It's a tremendous pleasure to be here today, and I wish to learn more about Thelema. Thank you.
Thank you.
And from the Babylon Church, Vesta Knox.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, 93s. Today's indeed a very exciting episode, so I'm just looking forward to learning from you.
And last but not least, Breno Zácaro, who got all these things arranged for us.
I'm the producer of this kind of meetings, by the way. Nice to see you, folks.
And welcome to the Project Mayhem, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing good. Can't complain.
Well, the first question here that we ask all our guests is, how did you get here? Well, how does a boy... here in Brazil is a Catholic country. So most of us were in the church. We were like participating in the mass, eating Bible snacks and drinking wine, and then we became wizards and witches and Thelemites. And then, what's your story?
It's pretty similar to yours, I imagine. I'm Hispanic, of course, so I too was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic schools. I studied with Jesuits. I, in fact, contemplated being a Jesuit priest for some time. I think I was always a Thelemite. I was born a Thelemite, and I just had to find it. But Catholicism kind of was my gateway, so to speak, because I was an altar boy very young, and because I went to private school, I had to spend hours every morning in the church. So, I didn't spend it messing around. I spent it in my own personal, developing a relationship with God, so to speak. I would circumambulate the church and go into the little saint rooms and light all the candles and earnestly pray. So I was always on a quest for divinity, all the way back to my, as young as I can remember. In third or fourth grade, I erected an altar in my closet in my bedroom and started performing my own masses. So it's probably something pre-incarnation, but I've always been on a spiritual quest, and it was just a matter of when I would cross Thelema. And what happened was that when I was in fifth grade, I started leaving my body at night. I started having very intense astral experiences. And of course, my parents and the priest could not explain to me what I was experiencing, but I knew it was real and it was something special. So I went to the library and I started reading. And luckily enough, the library I went to had some good books, including Robert Monroe's books on astral projection and some stuff that pointed me towards Crowley, like the Man, Myth, and Magic series that Francis King put out. I don't know if you know anything about that series, but it was an encyclopedic series of about 30 volumes covering the occult genre in general. And so in studying all that material, I realized that there was this whole other world outside of Christianity. And as soon as I came across Crowley, for whatever reason, I was like, that's the real shit. That's the real deal. And I started trying to get his books, but of course they were very hard to get at the time. We're talking early 80s. Damn near possible, especially on the West Coast. I imagine for you guys in Brazil it was even harder. At this time, the OTO is very small and just starting to formulate. And I'm in grammar school. I don't even know what's going on. Luckily, I'm in California, though. By about 7th grade or so, I started getting smart enough to say, okay, these books are out there. I just got to find them. And I went to a book dealer in the little town I lived in at the time and told him what I was looking for. And he told me to come back in a couple of weeks and he would have something for me. And when I went back, he had a whole list of dealers, book dealers from across the world that specialized in Crowley's books. And I called the first number, which was Donald Weiser, answered the phone. I called Weiser Antiquarian. And I got to know the folks over at Weiser. And by the age of 12 or 13, they're starting to send me books, Crowley's books. And I started reading them and getting more into it. But I still really wasn't serious. I knew it was my path. I always had a spiritual inclination. But once I entered high school, I got caught up in everything that everybody gets caught up in high school, you know, sex, drugs, dating, and all that kind of stuff. But I also, because I went to a Jesuit high school, I was also exposed to other world teachings. We studied Buddhism. The first place I learned about Kabbalah, these kinds of things, were in my theology classes at Jesuit. So more and more seeds were planted, so to speak. Eventually, of course, I did find the OTO. Phyllis being the actually first Thelemite I met, I just actually walked up to her house and knocked on the door, kind of unannounced. And no time at all, because it was all here in California, I just had to reach basically age enough till I could start making contact with people, and it was all around me. And that's how I came to find Thelema. But Phyllis used to say that you don't make Thelemites, you find them. And I've always found that to be true. And so I think I was born a Thelemite. I just need to find it. And I found it, thankfully, in my early teens. So
you mentioned the OTO. Can you explain to us Brazilians, what is the OTO? First of all, what is Thelema?
To me, Thelema is more of a philosophy. I know a lot of people try to put it into one category or another. And it's not that it doesn't include tantric ideas. It's not that it doesn't include magic and other philosophical schools. It does. But at its core, it's a philosophy. It's a new way of looking at life. And that's what I hold on to. And I think that's the only way you can get through all of Crowley's writings and through all the material with a clear head is to kind of keep in mind what Thelema's all about. What does it mean, the true will, and these kinds of things? And so I look at it more as a system of philosophy and metaphysics. Now, I happen to practice ritual magic, and I am a member of OTO and AA and these other organizations. But it's the philosophical truth of the law of Thelema that rings true to me, and that's why I'm here. If that wasn't the case, it wouldn't have been magic, wouldn't not have been enough for me. So that's Thelema.
And I have a question from Breno here. That's tell us how it was learning Thelema with Soror Meral.
Phyllis was an amazing soul, an amazing person. She's one of these people that once you met, you could see the light in her eyes and in her spirit. She came, Crowley used to say, and it's an old saying, that, you know, when you're ready, the right teacher appears. And Phyllis was the right teacher for me. She opened up so many doors, and she was so giving of everything that her knowledge, and she'd, you know, be straightforward with you as a teacher. And I don't think it's any coincidence that she was the first Thelemite I met. I mean, if it wasn't for the conversation I had with her that day when I knocked on her door, I might not be here either. But you know, I didn't expect because I just had an address for 418 Lodge. I didn't expect an elderly lady to open the door and say, hello. I was like, are you the OTO? But she invited me in for tea. And that conversation led to a very dear friendship that was formative in my life. And she was an amazing teacher, and she would test you in all these ways that you wouldn't expect. Like one of her favorite things to do in class was that she would bring out charts of famous people, but you would have the astrological information, but you wouldn't have the person's name. And then each of us would take a turn analyzing the chart and taking a guess at who the person was. And it's a very simple exercise, but it's also a very brilliant teaching mechanism, because you could tell right away how much you understood of astrology, where you needed further instruction, and furthermore, how intuitive you were. Because astrology was her thing. That was her specialty. And she had a very unique system, unlike any taught today. Just her house system was unique, the way she laid it out. But more than just being a brilliant astrologer was that she was very intuitive. She understood people, she could see people, and when she looked at charts, she read them intuitively. And so when you stood in front of her analyzing these charts, she could, very quickly analyze who you were and where you were magically, and your knowledge and whatnot. And so that's what it was like to have her as a teacher. In a certain way, you felt like you were talking to somebody that was a very dear friend, but you were also completely exposed in front of her. And it was a wonderful thing. So. I could share more stories about it if you need another.
Oh, no. Yeah, I was muted, sorry. So I have a more specific question now, because the first time I read your commenting on her astrological method, I was really curious, because as an astrologer myself, I was fascinated by this idea of a different way of reading the chart. So
Okay.
Could you share anything else about it?
Yeah, I can give you a brief overview, but essentially what happens is, if you look at astrology charts, the zodiacal signs kind of shift. And you got several rings, and the inner rings, the houses, and then it's the zodiacal banner, and the zodiacal banner kind of shifts, so the houses stay where they are. In Phyllis's system, it was just the opposite. The zodiacal banners were set in place and the houses moved. So like if you drew up a chart in her method, and a chart using sidereal astrology or some other form, she was herself a tropical astrologer. But if you drew up another chart and you held them up side by side, you'd have to like turn hers sideways almost to match the other charts. But the reason she did this is because, in her opinion, that means what that ultimately looked like was that the very first house, where you're not used to seeing the first house, was always the sign Aries. So it wasn't always the first house. In her system, it was always Aries, and we'd go Aries all the way around. And she looked at this progression from Aries all the way back around as the progression of one's life. So like the first three, the early signs, Aries, for instance, would represent like the first 5 years of your birth, for instance. It was more like 10, but give or take. She looked at things in decans and 30 degrees at a time, not just one sign. But anyhow, so you would analyze the chart intuitively as a progression of your entire life, beginning in Aries and ending in Pisces. And that was a very unique perspective. There's something called a zero house system, which is quite similar, but not exactly the same thing. There are some people out there that don't understand her system. I've heard some people try to debate that she learned her system from Mellinger, another famous Thelemite, who was her astrology teacher. And because of where he lived in Europe, it was far enough north that it could have been 0 degrees where charts were cast from. And so they thought because of that, somehow she had, had made this mistake. But no, Phyllis she was good enough where she could take your numbers and by hand, while you sat there, draw out your chart. She knew the math and everything. So, that's, most people have kind of lost that skill. So she knew what she was doing. And I, to this day, still read charts that way. I know there's a few others out there that you heard that did. Eshelman and Shoemaker and other people in her school are a sidereal astrologers, so they don't necessarily carry on that tradition. But a lot of us that knew her personally, like myself, we still do. And probably someday I'll write some more details out on that. But, that's probably something Shoemaker, in all honesty, should take on. But if he doesn't, I'll either push him or do it myself. Because at least historically, we should know, the world should know her system. And I, for one, think it's better than just the average approach.
And it is a great.
It's fascinating. Thank you.
We are fascinating for astrology, and I think that this system that Barbara told me before with the interview is very practical, because you get to see what the signs really apply in the life of the people, not just like you say, just that house here, and then you say, oh, you do this in this house at this point, because you do not do things on only one point in your life.
Yeah,
and you do that spread through your life.
Yeah.
I really love this system. I hope you get this thing published.
It's soon. It's just a small twist of how you lay out the chart. It really isn't, because everything should line up exactly the same. It's just that the chart itself is going to look different, and then you read it intuitively, slightly differently. But really, the planets and the houses and everything should line up just like they would in any tropical chart that you draw. It just won't look the same. That's all.
Yeah, the math is the same. If there are
the math's the same.
2 and 3 adds 5, and 3 and 2 adds 5. The math.
The aspects are all the same, so all that won't change.
Oh, this is fantastic. I have another question for just as much for the Brazilian audience. Could you tell us a little bit about what is OTO, COT, EGC, and AA? What's the difference between them?
Okay. I'll start with the College of Thelema, because that was Phyllis's baby, and that's the first thing, or one of the very first things. I guess technically the first thing I joined was the College of Thelema, which was the classes that Phyllis ran out of her house. The College of Thelema goes actually back to when her and Grady were together, and they first started reformulating the modern OTO. At that time, they also together formulated the College of Thelema. Now, and in some of the earlier editions, Grady had made some contributions, not taking anything away from Phyllis, because the college was hers. That was her big contribution. She was a teacher herself. So she felt that the best way to approach at least the base knowledge, the knowledge a student should have before they, join the AA, for instance, she thought that stuff would be best learned in a college type system. So she set up a curriculum and had classes and whatnot. And so that's what the College of Thelema was and still is. They're thriving. They're moving forward. I know there's branches down in Brazil. If it's not official, I imagine it won't be long. But so the college continues to exist. I think it's a wonderful curriculum. Now I haven't myself seen it for decades, but I know Shoemaker's in charge, so I'm sure it's doing well. So that's what the College of Thelema is. Just what its name applies. It's a place to go and learn astrology and the basic rituals and the material you need to kind of have under thumb before you can really start studying the heavier duty stuff. The OTO, which I joined shortly thereafter, is a fringe Masonic organization that predates Crowley. Crowley did not start the OTO. He joined the OTO. And early on, it was high-ranking Masons who got together and wanted to incorporate the mysteries of the East and the West, specifically the tantric kind of ideas from the East, and the general ideas that are given to you in Masonry, and the idea of perfecting yourself, becoming a better man, and these kinds of things. So it's kind of a marriage between those East and West schools, certainly more esoteric in nature than general Masonry, and allowed women on board, which was at that time, early 1900s, unheard of, especially in a Masonic organization. Crowley wrote some material. The head of the order of the OTO at that time saw it and said, "Hey, you know our secrets. I'm going to bring you on board." And shortly thereafter, he was made a high-ranking member and succeeded Royce when he died as the head of the OTO. Around 1914 to 16, Crowley rewrote all of the initiations. And to say rewrite, it's really more like write, because prior to Crowley, the OTO's material mostly existed on paper, really wasn't a living, breathing body. It was just a handful of people. And Thelema wasn't involved. So Crowley entirely rewrote the rituals. They're still very Masonic based. We know what books he used when he wrote it. We see the early manuscripts. If you're a Mason, a member of standard Masonry, and you go through the OTO degrees and the Masonic degrees, you're going to see some correlations. The first 3 degrees are birth, life, and death, symbolically. That's true of both orders. The OTO just takes it displays its own myths in that process. But they're very similar in overall in what they're teaching. So now you flash to modern times, and the OTO is, obviously completely Thelemic. And Crowley, over that period in time, invested a ton of his own teachings into the OTO's mysteries, which is another thing a lot of modern Thelemites hasn't sunk in yet, is that if you want to understand Crowley, if you want to understand Thelema, then you need to study all of it, or else you're only getting a part of the picture. If you open up the Blue Equinox, it's the very first thing it says that the truth is of 2 orders. One is external in nature, that's the OTO, and one's internal in nature, and that's the AA. So the OTO is this outer solar extension of Thelema, while the AA is an inner lunar kind of independent internal approach. But both schools are giving you mysteries that overlap, and when you understand both systems, you get to see what's going on there in between them. Essentially, what happens is in the AA system is that you climb up the tree of life. You go through a process of perfecting yourself, grade by grade, making yourself a proper vehicle for the God above, stage by stage. In the OTO, you're shown how the energy, the seed, manifests down the tree of life. So one's leading you up and one's bringing you down. One's the serpent and one's the lightning flash, Kabbalistically speaking. And when you understand the correlations between the 2 mysteries, then you understand what's going on. And so that's the OTO in a nutshell. It's a Masonic social group almost. You'll learn if you go to the OTO because people there are sharing. And I've met the most beautiful, wonderful people in OTO. So it's a great place for that. But it is also a social club. So you'll get all the stress and anxieties and interpersonal dynamics and problems that'll happen in any social group. There's assholes there as well, But I don't regret anything that I've ever experienced in OTO. I highly recommend it for anybody who Thelema is your path to get involved with OTO proper, that is, because it is a much different experience than the other groups that have made OTO claims. Because they perform the rituals. In fact, the rituals are today being performed at a standard higher than they've ever been. And that's one of the beautiful things that of the OTOs, that despite some of its growing pains, it's the way it works on this plane is that a person can show up, join, and then go through an initiatic process that will change your life. And it's done at a very high level, and it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. So that's what I think you go to the OTO for. It's a place to find friends, it's a place to find community, and it's a place to experience a great deal of the Thelemic mysteries, predominantly those that are coming down the tree of life. Now, AA is supposed to be an order attached to the supernal triad it's a completely interpersonal journey. Only person you really ever know or should know is your teacher. Generally, speaking, people get to know who's who here and there, but your only relationship really is to your teacher, and you only ever have one teacher. And so it becomes like a one-on-one kind of instruction where they take you through the tasks of the grades. And the tasks of the grades are clearly laid out in the equinox. You can look at Liber 185 or Abi Ignis, Mount Abi Ignis, where it's all mapped out on a tree. And you can see what each grade requires of the aspirant to say that they have achieved that grade and move on to the next grade. So it's a certain level of teaching and testing order. But it can only go so far. The work is still mostly done by the individual, because you can't grade somebody's spiritual achievements and whatnot. So the order can only lay out tasks. Did you read this? Did you study this? Can you tell me what this is? Can you perform this ritual? Can you do this asana, etc.? It's all testing in the stuff. But what's built into the system, it works because of how it unfolds karmically. Eventually, you're expected to turn around and teach yourself. So people reach a certain level of proficiency in the occult sciences in general before they can do that. And certainly, if somebody is just an armchair kind of magician, or doesn't realize they're on a spiritual path, they'll only get so far up the tree. The event, so it's kind of like a system that filters out itself. A teacher doesn't have to worry about whether a student is good or bad. He just needs to, or they just need to assign the tasks and let karma unfold as it will from there. And so that's the AA system. It's all about perfection of self. There's 3 tasks ultimately, and that's to sign the oath and start the work, to achieve knowledge and conversation of one's holy guardian angel, which is a Thelemic specific term, and the other one's to cross the abyss. But what all of these things represent is union with the higher. And every stage, it's union, it's love. Did I cover all the organizations there that you asked about?
EGC.
Oh, EGC. EGC is the church. Sorry, excuse me. I need a little water. Is the, for lack of a better term, the church arm of the OTO. So the OTO is kind of considered dual-fold. You have the EGC, which is the Gnostic Mass, and they have their own baptisms and confirmations and marriages, and they're the Gnostic Catholic Church. They modeled after, on a certain level, the Orthodox and Catholic Church themselves. So they have many of the similar rights: a right for death, a right for marriage, a right for birth, etc. And they have, of course, their own priests and priestesses and deacons and their own hierarchy. And they correlate with the OTO degrees, because when Jimenez Beta came into power, he specifically made certain grades associated with certain tasks or roles, I should say, within the EGC. In other words, you have to be a KEW in the OTO before you can be ordained as a priest or a priestess, and etc. So they overlap on each other, though on a certain level they're separate organizations. They were much more so separate than prior to HB, making them more unified.
Frater, do you think the College of Thelema today is the full representation of Phyllis Sackler's souls, like her legacy?
Yes, I wouldn't say the exclusive representation of her legacy, but certainly an important part. To the TOT and the TOTSS, the Temple of the Silver Star, those things came out via her students, essentially Astrum and Shoemaker. Not that she didn't, she wasn't there and she wasn't a part and she didn't have high degrees and whatnot, but they weren't her child, so to speak. The College of Thelema really was. In the Continuum, which was the periodical of the College of Thelema, is essentially her life's work. And the Jane Wolfe bios and the first two books that Shoemaker put out are essentially taken from there. You know, I mean, that's where they appeared in their original form. All her writings in astrology and the tarot, that's where you find them, is in the Continuum. And so the College of Thelema continues to teach the classes and publish her material. So yes, it's absolutely a representation of her legacy. I just wouldn't say the only, because she affected a lot of us. In all honesty, I'm not even in her lineage, and she's completely formative in my life. I love her as much as a person could love another. And of course, when she passed, her Eshelman and Shoemaker went separate ways, and I have dear friends on both sides of that, of those bodies or those schools, whatever you want to call them. And I think they're both carrying on her legacy in different ways. But it shouldn't be at all discounted that she left the majority of her copyrights and whatnot under Shoemaker, and Shoemaker continues to run the College of Thelema. So yes, in every real way, that's Phyllis's legacy.
Thank you, Frater.
So you defined the AA. Now, could you tell us how do you view the lineages, the different lineages? What do you think about this idea of lineages, and how do you work inside your own lineage?
That's a tough one, or not a tough one, but a politically loaded one potentially. But I'll pull no punches and try to be honest here as I can. Grady wrote an article in the OTO newsletter called "One Star in Sight," or no, who has the right to the 1 star? Who has the right to the 1 star? And I've posted this online, so I'm sure you can find it. And in that, he reflects what he believes the AA is and what it's going to become. And I think he was right on the money with everything that is written there. So the battle over lineages essentially comes down to, well, Crowley didn't have a bunch of lineages and this kind of thinking. So why should we? But what people don't realize is that the AA existed before Crowley, by his own admittance. He says there's 7 magi's of the AA, and he gives them all to you in Liber Aleph, and he mentions them again in the Book of the Lies, and several of them are even Gnostic saints in the EGC. These people obviously weren't a part of any lineage. Neither was Crowley himself. Yet all the world's great masters are considered to be, Magister Templies of the AA, because in all truth, they are. So how do you reconcile the two? So the idea of lineage has never made sense to Grady. It's never made sense to me, in the sense that you need to have it in order to achieve enlightenment. Every one of us, in fact, that kind of thinking is dogmatic. It's not Thelemic. Each one of us has to find our own path, whether that's Buddhism or whatever. What Thelema empowers you to do is to choose your own path and not get stuck in the dogmatic thinking of the old aeon that you have to do things exactly as Crowley did, or as Jesus did, or as Buddha did. No, you got to find your own way. That's Thelema. And so the way AA mostly operates is that different people broke out. And that's what Grady said, that it's really more of a web system. It's not a line, it's a web system. And so, and Crowley tells you anybody, even not in the AA, can take the oath of the abyss. So what he's telling you is that the next magus of the AA could come from anywhere. Okay? Now that doesn't throw the idea of lines out the door, because history is important. So what the lineages show is where you came from, your particular branch, who your teacher was, and that kind of stuff has historical validity. But I don't agree with anybody that tries to make the claim that because they have the best historical validity, they are the one and only true AA. That doesn't cut it in my book. I mostly have stayed out of politics because I leave that to the politicians. I'm not a politician. I'll just tell you how I feel, and then, do what thou wilt from there. I have people that I love dearly in all the lineages that I know of existing, and I've seen great work done by most all of them. And there's people that I respect across the board. And who am I to say, you don't have a paper from Germer, you're not legit? That just, to me, that's kind of stupid. So
one of the things that we learned from this show, you are guest 456. Is that the people who cares most about lineage is the people who knows less about Thelema and magic, and the best people to interview and the people who are wiser, they don't give a shit to lineages or degrees or anything like that, because it's life and magic.
It's true, and you'll find that most of the people arguing about it online are not the people in the hierarchy of these lines. They're students and they're neophytes battling because they're still trapped down here, and in the Maya of the ego, so to speak, and they're still playing these games. And as long as your life's invested in the politics of Malkuth, how are you going to raise up the tree, right?
Yeah, we call this the battle of Pokemon Master.
Yeah, we're down there on Malkuth throwing mud at brothers and sisters, right? It doesn't even make sense. We need to understand that we're all on the same path and much more similar than dissimilar. And most of the battles that came out of AA go back to the old days. In all honesty, it was the bad blood between Moda and Grady. It was the bad blood that came up between Phyllis and Grady after they divorced, and so because all these people were so passionate, they were also very vile in their attacks against each other. When I was alone with Phyllis, she, in a couple of moments, made it clear to me that she loved Grady, even to that day. But she never understood him. And she busted his balls at every chance she could. And all she could remember of the guy was the worst years of his life when he struggled with alcoholism. Not all the wonderful things he did over his entire incarnation. And unfortunately, that was also a time where most modern Thelemites got to know Grady. They don't know the man that Crowley knew, the man that Crowley made a caliph. Think about that. The spiritual head of the order. That's massive. So there's a whole nother side of Grady that really needs to come out. I know Jerry Cornelius, a former teacher of mine, because you mentioned that you had read his bio. It's a good book that discusses Grady's bio, but still as much is not known about his magical career because he was quiet about it. He didn't feel the need to broadcast to others what he was doing. But that's a whole other story. The point is that there's no reason for us in modern times to be repeating the arguments from 40 years ago. Those people are dead. Who we have now is Shoemaker and myself and people who most lines don't necessarily. As far as I can tell, most of us are all on good talking terms, and I look forward to that only getting better and better. And the lineage wars, I think, are already mostly dead. To be honest, there's only a few people still fighting that battle, and I don't think anybody outside of OTO proper even cares, to be honest.
Well, I have two other subjects that I love that I bet you like too. The first one is music. That I've read that you love to play music. So what similarities do you see about creating music and making magic? Can you?
Sure. At its roots, magic is creation. Anytime you create anything, you're doing magic. You know, when the great geniuses of any of the schools, you know, when you look at a Salvador Dali, immediately your mind starts feeding you images and stuff that Dali didn't even intend, right? He didn't know what you were going to see, because he's channeling something greater than himself. Same thing when a great musician writes a song. When you listen to a piece by Vivaldi or Jimi Hendrix, you're hearing his inner magus bringing a light of truth down to earth. So whenever any of us can enter that space where we're being creative, we're reaching our inner supernal self, and we're bringing a little bit of our own internal magus out onto this plane. So that's why creating is so human. Music, art, painting, whatever. It's so much of the human experience. It goes back before the written word, for God's sakes. And every culture has it. There's a reason. It's innate. It's human. And to express it is doing magic at its highest form. Really.
You bring your knowledge on Thelema into your music.
I wouldn't say that directly. I don't try to make my music Thelema. I know there's people out there that do that. I don't. Music for me is about expressing my internal stuff. Now, there's been times in my life that there was only music for me. You know what I mean? If you're a musician, you'll know at hard times, sometimes that's all you have. And because of that, I value music, and I don't do resh formal anymore. At 4 times a day, I play guitar 4 times a day. That's my resh. See, now it doesn't mean that I don't have some of those same thoughts. It doesn't mean I don't project some of the same imagery. But I think it's important for us to each reach into sacred space and create. To create is divine. You can look at a rock out in your yard. It's performing its will perfectly, without fault, but it's just a rock. You see, a human, you're invested with the ability to create. You become your consciousness is now part of the creative formula of the universe. That's how you are like God. So art's important.
Oh yes, and talk about creation. How do you manage your family life with your spiritual studies? Can you compare raising a kid with raising a student in the AA?
Oh, absolutely.
The main difference.
Yeah, sure.
What's worse? What's more troubled?
Well, first I should premise that I formerly studied child development in college, and my professional career was actually working with children. I worked in a program called Head Start here in America. That's what I did for a professional before I retired. And I also raised 5 children of my own, and also had a foster child. So children being a part of my spiritual development, I became a father at the age of 18. So I was a father when I was a child, essentially myself. So I've never separated the two. All my children grew up in the OTO. They all went to mass, and they know all the lines and the words and the signs, and they've all been exposed to that. And I never separated the two. And I know some people struggle with that. Like, how do you have children do the work when you got to do this and that and that and that? But they forget that the universe provides the actual work that you need in the incarnation. It's provided for you. Don't short skirt it. You see, it's almost the same problem with like traditional Buddhism, where you think you have to go hide away in a cave and meditate. You could do that for years and never reach enlightenment. A part of the process towards truth is to deal with the karma that you've been given. And karma is something that carries over from lifetimes and stuff. So you shouldn't try to escape the Malkuthian plane. You should embrace the Malkuthian plane and take everything as a part of your divine path. So for me, I don't think I'd be half the man I was if I hadn't been a father. Nor do I think I would be nearly as good as teacher, nor I was a supervisor for many years at the county. I don't think I would have been as good as boss. How did I learn to do all this stuff? Children. children are honest and direct, and they only know how to love in that way. And if you work with children, you learn what makes us all similar. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to be respected. Everybody wants to know that they're valued, that they have input, they have control of their own life. In fact, one of the practices I used to do, because of course I worked my way up to becoming a county supervisor, I started as a teacher, even a teacher's aide, when I first started working with kids, and just worked my way up the ladder. But so for many years, about 12 years, I was an actual teacher with preschool age children, mind you, because it's early childhood development. And one of the things I did to bring Thelema to them, because I wanted if you study childhood development, it's remarkable how much in a line it is with Thelema, because it so much supports the idea of individuality and the importance of instilling that in people. So one of the things I would do with my children is at circle, we'd all talk about our day and what worked and what didn't work. And in class, the kids and I would write out what the kids felt they had the right to do. It's a preschool version of Liberal. So the kids would say, I have the right to play with paint without being interrupted. And we'd make that a class rule. And I did this every year. And so the kids made their own rules. And in this sort of process, I kind of got rooted into what people really need. And I think that I hope that has helped me in my teaching when I've taken on students. Now, I'm essentially magically retired. I have been for some time. I do have a handful of personal students, but I'm not planning on taking it on anymore. The grading line has a life of its own. It doesn't need me for that. I need to write. I'm entering that stage of my life where I need to go into magical retirement and share some of what I've learned over the years. But working with adults, whether you supervise them, whether they're students of yours, etc., it's very much like, the symbology of the flowers in your garden that you must tend to is a beautiful way to put it. So I try to tend to my garden gently. And once I tell somebody once I take on a student, it's a lifelong commitment, just like it is to my own children.
I totally agree. As a school teacher myself.
Oh, very nice. You learn a lot from kids.
Yeah, it's perfect. I love the kids. They are amazing. So talking about creation and following this line of thought, how do you feel about being creative in Thelema? I feel a lot of people are really afraid of creating their own stuff, their own rituals, following their own intuition when it's possible, when it makes sense. How do you feel about it? I feel like you have already answered that kind of, but I would like to have some more direct speech.
I would just say in a nutshell, it's vitally important that somebody follow their own feet. Listen to your inner voice and worry about that. Thelema, with a lot of the Western esoteric schools, unfortunately, or not necessarily unfortunately, but one of the drawbacks is that there's so much knowledge. It's so left-brained or whatnot that people get stuck in all these details. But it's a spiritual path. And Thelema speaks to that more than this other stuff. So people should feel free to express themselves however they want. And these people that, bash them for it not being this or it not being that or whatever, it just points to where they are really, that they're mired in the ego and whatnot. It's not a good thing. People should follow their path and feel empowered in doing so. Doesn't mean there won't be mistakes or bumps, but that's important too, that they were mistakes and bumps that you chose. You see, that's how karma works. Gnosis is direct knowledge. How could you have knowledge if you don't engage directly? Without experience, you don't really have knowledge. You have book knowledge. You see, so the only real teacher is life. So we must engage honestly and earnestly with everything that is part of who we are. You're not gonna, otherwise you're just gonna kind of do this. You know, and the Thelemic world is full of people that are book smart, but spiritually lacking. And we got plenty of those. You're much better off the other way around. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, I strongly agree, and I think it makes sense with the analogy you used of the alchemy, the solar lunar alchemy. It makes perfect sense. And another question I would ask you is, a lot of people fight over OTO and AA, and you used the marriage, the alchemy, figurative speech to make sense of that. So how do you advise people, like they are arriving at Thelema and there is a lot of polemic, people are fighting everywhere, so how would an interested person, a person that feels the calling, that finds him or herself as a Thelemite, should approach those different methodologies, because you see them as complementary? So how to actually work on this complementation, on the creation of this path?
Okay, there was a lot there, but I'll try to approach the marriage of OTO and AA, because I think that's what you're asking, and how they correlate. Quite frankly, just by understanding solar and lunar, inner and outer, you get it. But you got to slowly piece this together. It's a very complex puzzle. But one very straightforward example is, if you look at the AA grades, there'll be like a 1 equals 10, and one will have a circle by it, and one will have a square by it. The circle is a representation of Nuit, and the square of Hadit. If you follow the grades, you'll notice that the square raises up the tree, but the circle descends the tree. Grady used to say that you learn to master and control the square. That's where certainty comes in. That's where mastery of self comes in. But you must put your faith in your love above. That's where the circle comes in. Thelemites are usually focused on the intellectual and certainty only. They even brush aside faith. But Crowley tells you very clearly it's both. But you see, people can only see where they stand. Some Christians read the Bible and find in those same Jesus's words reasons to hate gay people. I read those same words and I don't see that. Crowley used to say magic is a mirror, and all spiritual teachings are like this. So people project into those teachings what they want to see. And what they're really saying is something about themselves. But the Thelema is very much a system of love under will. It's about uniting that which is above with that which is below, and everything that has meant alchemically and otherwise. I have not seen anything in Crowley's Thelemic teachings which completely contradict the traditional esoteric teachings. In fact, it raises them to a new level. That's why I'm here. So, but to be real clear, if you understand how those circle and square kind of operate, and think of one as being what you're aspiring to and the other one what you're trying to get control of, you'll see that right when you start the work of the AA down in Malkuth as a neophyte, the square is given to Malkuth. So of course you got to have control of the body, you got to have your life in order before you can approach a spiritual path. But the circle's way up there in Kether, because you got to put your faith into something higher. What are you doing this for, right? If it's not a spiritual path, you ain't going to be able to do this. See, so the system has kind of its own built-in safeguards. And as that square goes, you go to the 2 equals 9 and 3 equals 8, you'll see that the circle starts descending and the square starts ascending. Those are your OTO and AA mysteries combined. And then the circle and the square meet at Tippereth, where one gains knowledge and conversation. And then the square rises above until eventually you're casting your hadith self across the abyss. And the circle, your God self, is hopefully descended all the way down to Malkuth, and the system's reversed. And now now man is God, you see? That's the goal of the whole system. So the circle and the square, the solar or lunar mysteries are there right from the get-go. It's just that in OTO, it looks all solar. With the lunar's there, it's hidden. In AA, it looks all lunar, but the solar's there, it's hidden. The mysteries are half known and half concealed. It's always what's visible here is invisible over here. What's invisible here is visible here. But yin and yang cannot be without each other always. So see, the opposite side of the coin has always been there, whether you've noted it or not. It has to be. It's just true of the Order's mysteries. Now, it's plain as day if you pull out Liber 777 and turn to page, I think it's 13 or something. I can't remember the exact page, but Crowley lists the chakras as they align to the tree of life. And so you correspond that with the OTO degrees, and it's clear that the chakras are being activated straight down the tree of life. So you have to invest into both schools to understand all the overlayings, but they're endless. They involve all the mysteries of both schools, everything tantric, it's intertwined in both schools. I mean, think about it. To perform the 9th degree, which is a tantric mystery, you're going to have mastered tantra and magic and yoga, but the OTO doesn't teach those. The AA does. You see? So it's the two together that you get the full Thelemic thing, and without it, you only have half the equation.
That's
Hopefully
brilliant.
that's some food for thought.
I would like to talk a little bit about On the Rights of Man.
Okay.
So it is your book that has been translated for Portuguese now. When did the idea of writing it, what is it about? Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, sure. The Rights of Man is obviously on Liber Oz, and that's what Crowley originally called it, was the Rights of Man, before he had a name for it. And like many Thelemites, I thought it was like this cool document, but I didn't understand the wealth of information that Crowley really put into it. In fact, some people try to argue, because Liber Oz is not classified, it doesn't have a Class A designation, it's not that important in these kinds of things. But if you read the book, because I'll tell you everything Crowley actually was going through and writing in his own journals when he wrote it, it was completely formulated magically. And to this day, it's the most published and known of his writings. So it's a very magically powerful document. What made me realize that was a student. See, your students always, good students, they're important. So this woman, she wrote me one day, and she asked me, and her name will remain secret, but she asked me, is there a way to apply Liber Oz internally? Is it just about rules out here on Earth of how we should act? Or is there a way to apply it internally in the passage inward? And I went away and thought about that for a little bit, and I had kind of an epiphany, a magical moment, so to speak. And I had a bunch of visions and information came pouring through, and I was like, oh, there's all this shit here that I never had considered. And so I started writing out notes and I started going to, luckily, thanks to Heydrich and HB and other folks, I have access to Crowley's archive. So I started looking at the journals and the letters and everything, and I realized, hey, there's way more magic here than I had ever even considered. And it's a wonderful story as well. So I showed my notes to Bill Heydrich, who I was visiting fairly regularly at that time. And he said, this stuff is good. You should publish it. Because I've never really, I've always, I don't like writing. I don't even like speaking. I've kind of been put into this position, it's not my way of doing things. So I like to talk to my students one-on-one and just let things be as they are. most 90% of my writings have never gone outside of my own students, and they'll probably be that way until I die. But some things I realized I needed to come out with, and so that people could start mostly seeing that there's another perspective in AA land. So Heydrich basically bent my arm and said, "You should publish this," and simultaneously, Bob Stein, who's a ninth degree member of the OTO and runs a lodge, or at that time was a member of a lodge in Buffalo, was inviting me to go visit him. See, I had stepped away from OTO for a few years, about 5 or 6 years. I'd gone off into my own private work for a while, and I was contemplating coming back. And it was Bob and Bill who bent my arm and said, "You need to come back." And they're both people I respect dearly. They're both ninth degree members of the OTO, and what I learned from them, observing them in their careers of the order, made it so that I wanted to come back. And I mean, the OTO has always been home for me. I just needed to step away for a while. So anyhow, Bob invites me out to his house, and literally just before I'm about to get on the plane, he asks me to lecture on Liber Pyrrhomotus to the members of the lodge. He knowing that I know that material and everything. And of course, I would have been happy to speak about that, but Pyrrhomotus has been written about 1 billion times. So and Pyramid Lodge, that's why they call themselves Pyramid Lodge, because they study that ritual as a group even. So I was like, I don't know how much more new I can give you guys there, but I have all this Oz notes that Heydrich really likes. I'll be happy to share that stuff with you guys. So I went down there and lectured on first time ever on Oz, and I got such good feedback from it and from Heydrich, and HB was contacted and he was on board, that I decided to go forward with the book. But the inspiration was simply a question from a student that inspired me, and that's why I wrote the book. I felt Liber Oz is a significant document that nobody had written about, and nobody knew the story about it. And even the things I were reading online from well-known Thelemites were historically inaccurate. There were inaccuracies all over the place. Even dealers, well-known dealers, couldn't identify the first edition even. So I had to get books, and it was kind of laying there for me. Here's an amazing Thelemic topic nobody's ever covered, so it was almost easy. And once I started writing, the book came out, and
And Liber Oz is especially important for us Brazilian because of how Seixas. I believe Barbara has more knowledge on this. I'm not a really great knowledge of musics.
Well, go ahead.
I'm sure you are familiar with Raul Seixas. I don't know, but he was a great musician, and he's from here, my state, so I'm kind of proud of that. Yes. My father met him actually, like on the streets, when he was not that famous, but he was one of the biggest rock stars we had, and he loved Liber Oz so much that he has a song where he sings it completely. And he used to read Liber Oz on his concerts, and it's amazing how he was able to penetrate common sense. Like everybody here knows about him. Even now, like when I was born, I don't remember now when he passed away, but like when I was born, he passed away like just a couple of years later. So I couldn't see it all live, but I had this contact with his songs, and all Brazilians know about this. All Brazilians know, Viva a Sociedade Alternativa, and people have no clue it's Thelema. So it's amazing, So Johan saying it's 1989, so I wasn't born. I was born 1991, and then but I am so familiar with all of that. And here in Salvador, the city that he lived most of his life, life, his songs played all the time, and even nowadays, people who are very young are familiar with his songs and his ideas. So there is this Thelemic spread of a philosophy in Brazil, and people have no clue.
Yeah, I of course know his story, but I heard it indirectly, of course, from Brazilian friends that have taught me about him. But I know he got that from Moda, and it's one of the wonderful things about Moda and all those that came after him, even those here in America, like Wasserman and Jimenez Beta and stuff. Almost every single thing Moda published included a copy of Liber Oz. Everybody that I know from that line thumps Liber Oz. Even Wasserman put it in on almost everything he printed. You know, and not that Wasserman was directly from Moda's line, but he was at least early on in his own career influenced by Moda. So, you know, Moda's influence is huge, and he understood the power of Oz. In a nutshell, magic's all about causing change, and change has got to happen internally and externally, both, right? If we're going to create the new aeon, the world we all want to live in, then we need changes in the external world. And that's what Liber Oz is essentially trying to do. It's screaming against tyranny. It's telling people, be happy, be free. You know, it's the most liberating document maybe ever penned. And because of that, that's why Crowley says it's the OTO plan in a nutshell. Because if the OTO is going to change society outwardly, this has got to be our calling card, Liber Oz. It's a brilliant document.
Could I change the subject first?
Sure.
We talk about something that we live in a historical way all the time. And you mentioned Bill Heydrich. We never discussed this in the questions, and he passed away. So, like now,
Yeah,
when I he was still alive, I'm saying like, yay, he's still alive. So, for the Brazilian people who don't know who Bill Heydrich is still is in their heart. Could you have talk to us what I know and you'd like to know more? Who this guy was? Why he's important?
Bill Heydrich was a beautiful man, a ninth degree of the OTO, and the first Grand Treasurer General of the order. He was a direct student of Grady McMurtry's and Grady's right-hand man. It's very clear to say there's a few people here in America that if they didn't exist, we probably wouldn't have OTO at all. And the three that are on that for certain, and there's probably a couple more, but the three that are on it for certain are Grady and Phyllis and Bill Heydrich. Bill Heydrich is the guy that answered all the letters and all the emails and all the phone calls and printed the OTO newsletter and the Thelema Lodge calendar and made sure they were sent out worldwide. He worked tirelessly for the order for all the years that I knew him. And he was a man of absolute integrity. And he never wanted any accolades. He just worked in the background quietly. I worked with him a lot in the last few years of his life. He was my personal mentor and a dear, dear friend. And he was still scanning OTO archives. The guy just never stopped, you know. And his wealth of knowledge was deep, really, really deep. He loved history. And so he would know little things that other people had no clue about. And he would be able to provide clarity to things. And you know, I'm telling you how he impacted me, but in the bigger picture, he's legendary because he did this for so many people. Their very first contact in America was Bill Heydrich. As Lon once said, sometimes he was the only grown-up in the room. because it was up to him to really keep things running in the OTO while Grady and Phyllis were fighting, and there are different battles going on here and there. It was him, you know. So when he passed, Frater Sabazius, who's the king of the American OTO, wrote, "I'd like to see anybody try to say, you know, give us a synopsis of everything Heydrich did," because he knows it's impossible. Heydrich did everything. So,
and he had an extensive amount of knowledge put in the internet. I remember 1995, 1996, in the ages of gas internet. I've seen his websites.
Yeah.
But when I wrote role-playing games, when I used Kabbalah as a magic system, and much of the things that I used on the game, I got from Bill Heydrich.
Without Heydrich, we probably wouldn't have so many gems from Grady either, because Heydrich understood that Grady was towards the end of his incarnation. He once, and I don't have my journals with me, so I wouldn't want to try to give the story, but once Heydrich compared Grady to like a special antique lamp, because he used to have these lamps from the Holy Land that he put these old school oil lamps that, to this day, you know, a lot of Jewish holidays they'll bring out this one special lamp that's supposed to represent the internal light of God and stuff. And he drew all the symbology. It was very beautiful. I can't give it to you the way he did, but essentially he was saying that's how Grady is. You know, he's old. He's not at his peak. Sometimes it's hard to understand what he's saying, but in there was something so special and so unique that nothing else can compare to it. And he knew how to keep Grady online and tap all that. And he made sure that Grady told him all the stuff that was most important. So if you go to those old OTO newsletters, they're full of entries that Grady put in, but at the behest of Heydrich. And Heydrich's the one typing him up and editing him and making sure all that stuff's recorded. And because of that, we have a wealth of knowledge of the stuff that Grady learned from Crowley. We wouldn't have it anywhere else if it wasn't there. It comes from his students only, and Grady only had 3 students. And it's very significant because nobody in modern Thelema was a personal student of Crowley's except for Grady. You know, only Germer and Crowley could say that. And if you read the letters between the 3 of them, you know, towards the end of Crowley's life, it's clear that Crowley's investing these 2 individuals above everybody else to make sure that Thelema survives. And that's why he comes up with the office of the caliph, you know, which is another thing people don't understand too well. But if you look into what a caliph means in the history, it's the spiritual leader of the line. And in the private letters, he made it clear that he didn't believe Germer was going to be able to do this for much longer, because he understood that Germer was an old soul and that it would fall onto Grady to make sure that Thelema survived. And in truth, it fell onto a lot of people, not just Grady. But Grady brings us a sliver of those teachings directly from Crowley through his students, including Bill Heydrich, that we simply would not have otherwise. And that's why I can sit here and speak with authority about the way AA should look, at least according to Grady. See, I never knew Grady myself. Of course, I've had 3 teachers. Each one of my teachers knew Grady. 2 of them were students of his, and 1 was married to him. And so, and I grew up in Thelema Lodge, so to speak. So I was a generation behind. He was dead for a few years before I came around. And I think that was good, because people that knew him too directly, sometimes you can't see when you're too close. So I got to know Grady indirectly by his influence on the community. And it was clear how inspiring he was. Much like Moda. I mean, Moda brought Thelema to the entire fucking continent. Without Moda, you guys wouldn't have him down there. You know, so some people's karma is greater than the average person. And Grady and Murdy and Moda and Heydrich were these kinds of folks where their work was something bigger. And God bless them all, really.
God bless. I have one last question for you. Would you have any advice for the beginners that you want to share with us? Or to the Brazilian audience, people who are getting to Thelema now, who are listening. We have in this podcast, we have several people from several different spiritualities. Yeah. We have from witchcraft from Banda and King Banda and all Brazilian religions and everything like that. And people are very curious and they watch this show to get knowledge of other spiritualities and paths. So what advice would you give to these beginners?
Those new to Crowley and to Thelema, it can be very easy to get overwhelmed. The guy was a genius who wrote out a level where he kind of expected his readers to know all this stuff. So all of us started somewhere and none of us understood it at first. So don't be intimidated when you approach Crowley. He covers a very broad base of material. And don't think you have to be an expert at all of those things before you can start practicing and living Thelema. Because what Thelema is more than anything is a philosophical approach to life. It tells you that you have a divine purpose to be here, and your only job is to find that. It doesn't matter whether you're a Wiccan or a Buddhist or whatever. What the Book of the Law of Crowley gives us, though, is that he strongly suggests you abrogate, right? That's what the Book of the Law tells us, to abrogate, which means that you're not afraid of replacing what you have with something new if it works for you. Don't get rooted into the way it was and think that you can just, follow ABC. If you could do these rituals in order and achieve knowledge and conversation, everybody would do it. And we just, we'd graduate a new class of magicians every couple of years, but it doesn't work like that. At its root, we're talking about a spiritual path. So the Thelema screams, find your own way. And Crowley gives you a framework, the tree of life, essentially, wherein to be able to map your progress and all these correspondences, so these things start to make more sense, how they're interconnected. So you can maybe understand what it means by right thinking. What did the Buddha mean by that? How does that work for you as a Thelemite? It's plain as day that if you want to manifest your karma, you need to make sure that what you're thinking is in line with your true will. So there's a place for right thinking, you see, and it's this way with all the Maguses. One of the ways I best learned to understand Crowley and Thelema was that I studied all the Maguses he gives us in AA. Go look at Buddha, but look at it with a Thelemic lens on. Don't, like the Book of the Law tells you, he tears out the flesh of the Buddha and he pecks out the eyes of the Jesus. It's not because everything that is in these teachings is wrong. It's because Christians lack right point of view. Buddhas lack right practice. Think about what the Book of the Law is telling you on another level. It's not that every Magus can only speak truth, but it's the followers afterwards that immediately throw it into all this dogmatic stuff. So my advice to a Thelemite is to follow your own inner voice. Don't be intimidated by the level of material. Pick if you're going to dig deep into it, you are going to have a kind of a broad knowledge of the occult sciences, because that's the language Crowley speaks in. So you're going to need some astrology and some Kabbalah and some Tarot and etc. But pick the one that interests you, and then just get into that. And one will lead to the other. Don't think that you have to memorize it, and that's the only way it's going to work. Eventually, the knowledge just sinks in over time. I'm no different than everybody out there. I've probably just been at this a little bit longer. That's all. You see? So just pick up, read what inspires you, and work from there. And luckily, you all live at a period of time where you have the Landequettes of the world. There's a lot of really good books out there that you could go to. You don't have to go direct to Crowley if you need something in between. I personally just went straight to Crowley because there wasn't so much of the other material, and going to other people, I would always get their take on it. And I could recognize right away that a lot of these people aren't necessarily the kind of folks I should be listening to. Some of them are. Bill Heidrich, Lon, Phyllis, you meet people like that, you listen, right? All these Thelemites arguing about dumb crap online. Usually you spend 2 minutes, you realize they don't know anything or very little. And they argue because they're lost and stuff. So stay away from all that crap. Leave the politics to the politicians. There's nothing better than having a community. And the community has to get past all that crap. Don't let orders dictate who you call a brother. Right?
All right. Well, thank you so much for the interview. It was really, really, really great. Your thoughts, some of the bases that we try to do this on this show. I don't know if Breno told you, we started this program. We have a symposium, a Brazilian symposium of Hermetism. That had several editions, but then came the pandemic and we couldn't meet. So they started, why don't you interview some of the authors and lecturers and things like that? And here we are. And then we start interviewing people from all different religions and orders and grandmasters and Buddhists and Druids and authors, writers, tarots, alchemists and everything. And it's very, very beautiful to see that everyone has a path. And the people who we love most to interview with people like you, that when you say, your eyes spark. And we can see that you love what you do. And this I think it's the most beautiful thing.
Thank you.
For us. Barbara, any last comments?
It was brilliant. Thank you very much. Mostly for your generosity, because we can sense the generosity flowing within your words, and it's so rare in our community, unfortunately. And it was great. You said some things that really inspired me and that will take some time to sink in truthfully, but I'm pretty sure some of my thoughts have changed tonight, and thank you, because I love to change when it means I'm moving forward. So thank you very much.
Johan, last comments?
I would like to thank you, Frater Orpheus, a lot, because your words will reverberate through our hearts ever. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
André, last comments?
My first and last comment.
Make it a good one.
I will try. I don't speak in English. I understand a lot of stuff that you say, but I was talking with Barbara here in the chat, and I was a clown in hospital for almost 2 decades. Barbara, please help me. And
decades, you don't need help. You speak very good English. Go on.
But I never listened about Thelema just like tonight, because we learn about rules, and this, like you say, this intimidate when you touch this, when you come to Thelema. And I'm studying to AA, and I'm reading a lot of books and thinking, why I'm reading this? I don't understand, or maybe someday I will. But when you see in other words, and this come to me just like when I was a clown in a hospital. I don't must to know everything. When I'm the door, let the kid bring the magic. Don't be anxious to create before enter in the room. Just go. And and this changed all what I think, what I learned till now about Thelema. So this conversation changed everything. And
Wonderful. To encourage you to continue in your AA work, I will tell you that the material that's given to the student, to the patient, or all the reading and writing and the intellectual tests you're given, are designed only to make sure that you have the ability there's a common language between you and your teacher. That's why they're shoving all this all the way down your throat, so that when they mention, Malkuth, you know what the hell that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not that material is innately important to your spiritual development. It's important for the conversation, the dialogue, because that's your teacher's only way of teaching you. A teacher has to teach from their own knowledge and experience, or else they're not being honest. So that's why that material's there. Once you get past that stuff, the AA becomes a totally different thing. In fact, when the AA first started, it didn't even have that material. But so many students were failing. Crowley was like, "Oh, we got to do something, because nobody can understand what the hell we're doing." So that's when he came up with all the reading list and the student materials. Like, you got to kind of know this before we can, talk the same language.
Okay, so don't understand. I'm not alone in this.
Oh no, you're not alone, and sometimes it takes years. I'll share one of my own personal stories. I was a direct student of Phyllis's, but I never joined AA under Phyllis. And sometimes and I look back and think that maybe I should, but in truth, I know that everything went the way it was supposed to, because ending up with the teachers I did, I learned all this material I wouldn't have learned otherwise, because the grading line had its own internal teachings. All lines have their own internal teachings, and from what I gather, that they're all different. They're all wonderful in their own ways and stuff. But you know why I didn't join under Phyllis? And Shoemaker asked me this question one day, and the honest reason is I wasn't ready. I wasn't serious enough. Like I knew that I was on a spiritual path. I knew that divinity was important to me, but I wasn't ready to be serious about the work. Yeah. That came a few years later. So there's no race, there's no rush. You're given as many incarnations as you need. And don't believe that your challenges and your obstacles are going to be the same as somebody else's, because they're not. I hate when people talk about how the path is always this horrible experience and stuff. And it's like, if you expect that, then that's what you'll get. In truth, your path is going to be exactly what your karma demands. The angel will provide the experiences every single one of us need to get to the next level. Your work is right in front of you, everywhere around you. Just do it. You see?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for today.
Yeah,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Breno Zácaro, your last comments.
I'm happy with this interview, and it's a little step in a long run to do a lot of things that we need, and I want to do, desire to do, and I don't know why, but some of this. It's terrific talk, bro, and the future is going to be bright. I'm struggling with the idea that we lost two great guys in a few decades, Hendrix and Euclides here in Brazil, that they had a lot to talk. We need to record the stuffs, just for the historical issue. We have the diaries, but the voice, the way for the next generations, and we lost these two.
Yeah, we've lost way too much of our history.
So we need to stop doing that. and we record each other like human beings, being Thelemites, how we live together and fight together. I was reading the book from Jared York and Ahad. They are picking each other for like 30 years.
Yeah.
You need to love someone to pick each other for 30 years. Usually you just pass along and you don't do you're going to do something else, right? So it's possible that we can do this different, you know, like see human beings being human beings and fighting with the heart. So it was a touching moment today for me as well. Thank you so much.
You know, I once had a student of mine who was a practicus and realized that Buddha was his calling. It's one of the reasons I constantly refer to him, because I learned so much from the student. He decided he wanted to become a monk. And so he went away and started practicing seriously. And he reached a point where he was getting ready to take his oaths. And of course, when you get to that point, you dedicate your life to Buddhism. So he looked at me as his teacher, and it's, how can we continue this, you know, many decades of spiritual dialogue we have between each other when I'm now a Buddhist. So I told him to bring me all the books that they gave him to read. And I read them. And I learned to be able to speak the same mysteries and truths through them, but using the words of Siddhartha. You see? If I had told him, oh, you're not a Thelemite, put down the sutras and pick up a book of the law, I would have been telling him something that's not his true path, not his true will. You see, so it falls onto us who are AA. We swear to guide humanity forward, not just those that agree with us, not just those that call themselves Thelemite stuff. And it's a very high bar to set, really. But I think that's if you're going to call yourself a member of the supernal order, then who can you turn your back upon? You know, and because instead of just saying, you're not in the AA no more, and because I did the other way around, I said, teach me. My understanding of his teaching, Buddhist teachings, grew exponentially. And now I understood why he was a magus and why Crowley could understand that he was a magus. And that same light of truth is in all spiritual schools the moment you have eyes to see it.
Yes, that's wonderful. I would say, any last comments? And how can people find you?
Oh, I try to be invisible, but you can find me on Facebook.
Okay.
That's my only social media connection is Facebook. You can contact me pretty easy there. You just Google Frater Orpheus, I'll come right up. And I don't hide from people. I just my work is mostly private. You know, I love to share, and I feel obligated to share. Now, someday you wake up and you become the elder in the room, which is kind of what happened in my case. And I never wanted this role. I ended up with it. And so now I'm obligated. And in a lot of ways, I'm honored. Anything I can do to help you guys down there is a blessing to me. It's just, so it's my honor.
All right. For us, it was an honor and a privilege. We could stay here talking to you for hours and hours. We'll definitely be here in the show again. And know now that you have friends here in Brazil.
Well, hopefully I'll be visiting.
We'll take you to visit some Umbanda and Kimbanda sites. You can talk to spirits here. We will show you everything.
Love that.
Thank you so much, Frater Orpheus. And to the people who were with us now, I really don't know how to say this in English, but you have to press all the buttons, the like, the ringing bell and everything. We don't follow algorithms, so I really don't care, but YouTube does not distribute us. So you have to, if you like this interview, you have to share it with your friends, because you're not going to find it on YouTube naturally. Thank you, everybody. André, Breno, Johan, Vesta, Frater Orpheus, and you that were with us. And we'll see each other in next Mayhem Club.
93.